Mark Hancock is a teacher trainer and author based in the UK. He holds an MA in teaching English from Austin University. His books include Pronunciation Games, English Pronunciation in Use, Authentic Listening in Practice with Annie MacDonald, and Prom Pack 1 to 4, Hack McDonald's ELT 2017. He also runs the teacher resource websites http:/prompack.com and the hancockmcdonald.com/ with Annie MacDonald. And we also have Taylor Veigga. T. Veigga is Trinity TESOL tutor, teacher trainer, and materials designer based in Rio. He holds a BA in languages, a specialization in media education, the CPE, and the Delta modules 1 and 2. He has written articles on various subjects related to teaching, as well as presented at conferences in Brazil and abroad. An active member of the UT community, T is part of the Brazil Advisory Council and has been a pedagogical coordinator for BRELT since 2015. Once again, I would like to welcome the both of you. Again, it's an honor to have you here. And now the stage is yours.
Right, thank you very much, Felipe and Margaret, and thank you for everybody at Braz TESOL Bahia chapter for joining us today, and EnproLI. Our talk is called Pronunciation Priorities for a Fairer World. And we're going to divide the talk into two halves. The first half is just food for thought, some ideas for you to take away and think about. And the second part, some more practical suggestions about classroom activities for your class on Monday morning, whenever you have your next class. Okay, so let me begin with this question. What is a native speaker, and why do we care? Well, if I ask you what is a native speaker of English, imagine in your mind what such a person is. I'm guessing that a lot of people will probably think of a person who's from the United States or from the UK, and probably a Caucasian, a white person. So very strange, but that's probably the first thing that might come into your mind. Why do we care about native speakers? In the business of ELT, you hear native speaker a lot. For example, in adverts for schools, they say, oh, we have native speakers teaching at our school, and so on. It's supposed to be a good thing. But why on earth would a native speaker be a good thing in the world of ELT? I suppose it's because people think, well, they are the people who own the language. The people who speak English, the people from England, for example, own English. There must be some idea like that. I think this is problematic. Why? Because what's the reason that everybody around the world is learning English these days? What's the reason for that? The reason is surely because English is now an international language. So people use English to communicate amongst themselves, whether or not there's anybody from England or America in the room. It's an international lingua franca. And in that case, who is a native speaker of it? Who is the native speaker of English as a lingua franca? Well, I think everybody who speaks English intelligibly is a native speaker of English as a lingua franca. Me, you, everybody who speaks English intelligibly is a native speaker. So why do people obsess about native varieties, specifically American English and British English? Why are people so sure that these are the most important models I think it's because we have a wrong idea of what teaching pronunciation is about. We're getting mixed up between teaching pronunciation and accent training, and they're completely different things. Accent training is helping people to sound more like somebody else. So for example, I'm going to try and train you to sound like somebody from, say, London. That's accent training. Pronunciation teaching, on the other hand, is what most of us are doing in the world of ELT, which is helping people to become more intelligible in a global community. So we need to get away from the idea that pronunciation teaching is about teaching an accent. It's not. It's about helping people to become more intelligible. Right, so easy to say that, but how do we do it? I think once you separate accent and intelligibility, then you have to decide what aspects of pronunciation are for intelligibility. And I like to think of this metaphor of a key. Here's a key, look, right? You can see the key has two ends. This is the business end, and this is the handle. Right, the business end of the key, it's very important that it must be exactly this shape. Okay, if it's not this shape, you won't get in the door. The handle end, on the other hand, you need a handle, of course, but it can be any shape you like. And in my metaphor, the handle end is like accent. The exact shape of it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what your accent is, but you must have the exact part at the business end of the key. In other words, certain features of pronunciation which are essential for intelligibility. So we'll be talking a bit about that in today's session, which are the essential features. But before we start on that, can I just give you an example of something which is at the handle end, and yet you see it in lots and lots of course books, etc. And it's the thing which is represented by this symbol here, schwa. We hear a lot about schwa in English language teaching, and we're told that it's the most important sound in English because it's the most common one. But what would happen if you didn't have the schwa? Or if you didn't reduce the vowel to schwa, how bad would that be? Well, frankly, it wouldn't be a problem at all. You'd be perfectly intelligible even if you didn't reduce your vowel to the schwa. Let me show you an example. Taylor, could you play this clip from Coffee and Ann, please? And I'll just share the slide.
Of course. Just a second. Let me see if I can share my slides here.
So I'm just going to get you to listen
Just a second.
to this short clip from Kofi Annan. He used to be the leader of the United Nations.
Sorry to interrupt you. Felipe, can I have host privileges, please, so we can share the audio?
And
Felipe or Maggie, whoever is there, for us to have host privileges.
What do you need again, please?
I need you to make me a host so I can share my audio.
Is it okay, co-host?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, just a minute.
All right.
and pay attention to the letters in yellow.
Yes. All right. Mark, I think for a second, your screen is not going to share. Let's test this out because actually I just want to share the audio. Can you still see Mark's screen?
I can.
Good, good. Me too. So whenever you're ready, I can play.
Okay, ready. No, it's not working. Okay, Taylor, let's abandon this. It's not going to work, is it?
Ah.
All right. So what I was going to demonstrate with this is that if you listen to Kofi Annan, you'll find him on YouTube. You'll notice that he doesn't actually reduce a lot of his vowels to schwa in the way that a native speaker from Britain or America probably would. And yet, I'll just stop sharing. Yeah, despite the fact that he doesn't do that, he is very intelligible. Most people will agree that he's an extremely intelligible speaker. So why do we insist on trying to train our students to produce this schwa when you don't actually need it for intelligibility? You need it for receptive purposes. You need to be able to understand it as a listener, but you don't need to produce it. So that's an example of something at the handle end of the schwa. Sorry, at the handle end of the key. So Kofi Annan could equally well be a model for us. Why should it be people from Britain or the United States who are the model of English? It could be anybody who is an intelligible speaker, be it from Africa, be it from Brazil. And there's no reason why you yourself could not be a perfect model for your class. So to sum up, if you ask yourself why you're teaching pronunciation, I think the answer has to be it's for intelligibility. Just remember that. Okay, over to you, Taylor.
All right, so let me start by sharing my screen. Unfortunately, the audio track did not work, but we can send you after the session and just get in touch with us if you're really curious about how he sounds. Well, I'm going to tell you a story that happened more or less 20 years ago. There was this teacher called Jennifer. She was very interested in pronunciation, and she had there in England, where she used to work as a teacher, she had a really diverse group of students, which is very common for this kind of interchange program. Students go there, go to England, go to the USA, to Australia, from various parts of the world. And then this teacher, she realized that these students, they could communicate among themselves, even though they were not following basically what she was teaching, what she had been teaching them. So all those golden rules that we learn in books about connected speech, about some sounds, she realized that they, even though they were breaking those rules, they were perfectly intelligible. And that's when she wanted to go further and study that a little more. That's when the Lingua Franca core came out. So she analyzed their speech to then come to a list of things that were very important for intelligibility. And I'm going to share this list with you. So most consonant sounds were considered important back then. Can I have in the comments, in the chat, the sound, actually two sounds, but the sound that was not considered so important? I'm gonna see if you get this right. From the consonants, from the consonant sounds, which sound did she not consider so important? No, the H sound was considered important. The R sound, T was considered important too. Yes, Carolina got it right. So most consonant sounds were considered important, but the TH sound, the TH realizations, the voiced and the unvoiced one. Most consonant clusters were also considered to be important. And what is a consonant cluster? Consonant cluster is when we have a number of consonants together. For instance, here in the word cluster, when I have this C and L here, that I make the sound cl or cluster, this combination, for instance, is considered important for intelligibility purposes. Vowel length is also considered something important. And what do I mean by that? For instance, what we learn as the shorter vowel sounds and the longer vowel sounds, remember this is distinction. This is considered important. And also the central vowel sound that you have in words like a bird, learn. So this sound was also considered to be very important by her. Another element was appropriate placement of nuclear stress. And what does she mean by that? Here she's talking about, in simpler terms, sentence stress. So that kind of stress would be very important for intelligibility in international contexts. At the time, as you might imagine, this was quite controversial. It kind of is until these days, because there are many things in books and course books that authors consider to be important, some things that native speakers produce that are not here. They are not part of this list. For example, connected speech is not part of this list. What we would call vowel quality, for instance, if you can make the sound a, or if you're going to produce the sound as a, for instance, if you're going to consider these two different sounds. So that would not be important according to her list. And many people these days, they criticize this list a lot. But we need to have something in mind here. This is the result of research that was conducted 20 years ago. And this was not meant for classroom use. So when she created this list, she never said, okay, so these are the important things. This is what I'm going to call the lingua franca core, and this is what you should be teaching, and only what you should be teaching. She never did that. And sometimes people misinterpret this. And they think, okay, so Jennifer Jenkins, because as I said, her name was Jennifer, and you probably have heard of Jennifer Jenkins before. After that, she has published extensive research. She's a very important person in the field of English as a lingua franca. Not only when it comes to pronunciation, but how do we think that this document actually help us? I'd like to think of this as a compass that is going to show me some direction, but not as a map that I'm going to have the exact directions and tell me exactly where I should go and turn and go north, south. Here, it is something more general. This is something that can be my compass, but I do not have, just because something is not here, to completely ignore it. And this is where I think many people, many teachers sometimes may think, okay, so if you're talking about English as a lingua franca, the lingua franca core, it is basically about anything goes, so you can say anything. No, it's definitely not about anything goes. First, because if you manage a student to produce all this, you are going to be a very successful teacher. And second of all, because we're not saying that the other things are not important. for communication. You're just saying that in those international contexts, perhaps students should be aware that these are the things that are going to perhaps make more of a difference. Mark, over to you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so in the Lingua Franca core that Taylor was just talking about then, he talked about vowel length. And so I'd like to demonstrate an activity you can use to focus on this in the classroom. And here I've got my teaching aid, which is, as you can see, a piece of elastic band. And this represents the short vowel I, as in fish, or live, let's say live. It's a kind of relaxed looking vowel with your muscles relaxed, like this elastic band here. But then there's leave, and you can see the tension there. This looks like my mouth, right? Leave. You've got the so the long vowels have more tension, muscle power in them like that, and the short vowels are more relaxed. So here's an activity. This is actually from my first book, this activity. This was published in 1995. So as you can imagine, I was only 10 years old at the time. And here we go with an activity from that. Oh, by the way, I did want to mention that about the topic I was talking about before. I wrote an article about it on this website, Pronunciation and Privilege. So you can see that if you like later. But here's the activity I'm talking about. We've got vowel pairs like leaving and living. I'm living with mum. I'm leaving with mum. Don't hit the plates. Don't heat the plates. Don't slip on the ice. Don't sleep on the ice. Can you feel it? Can you feel it? There's actually a lot of words, meanings which are distinguished by these two sounds in English and not in Portuguese, of course. In Portuguese, there is just one vowel halfway between these two. So you have to make sure that the students can differentiate these. So here's an activity to do with that. This is the full game, but it's, in order to explain it, I'm just going to look at a part of it, right? So I'm going to say a sentence with the word living or with the word leaving, and you have to listen and decide whether I'm going to Miami or Moscow. Okay. I'm leaving with mum. I'm leaving with mum. I hope you went this way, because leaving is over here on this side. I can't see your faces, so I'm just going to have to guess that you went that way. But if you went the other way, who was right and who was wrong? I don't know. Maybe I need to speak more clearly. Maybe I should exaggerate it. I'm leaving with mum. If I said, on the other hand, I'm living with mum, I'm living with mum, with a very short vowel, then I would hope you went to Miami. So here's a more complicated version of the same thing with two choices. So you have to remember where you're going with this. So number one, don't hit the plates. Don't hit the plates. And number two, don't slip on the ice. Don't slip on the ice. Where did you go? I'm hoping I'm hoping that you went this way. Don't hit the plates and don't slip on the ice. I'm hoping you went to Rio, where Taylor is. Now, this kind of game, as I said, the full version is this. So you've got 4 choices and lots of cities along the top. So what you do is first you do it with you speaking and the students follow to try and find the place. And then after that, you can get volunteers from the class, one to speak and the rest of the class listen. And then finally, you can get them in pair work where one of the pair speak and the other one follows and see if they get to the same place. The important thing about minimal pair activities like this is that there is no such thing as correct. There is only, does it work or does it not work? Okay, and I think that's very important in pronunciation. We always think in terms of, oh, you're saying it incorrectly. Instead, we should change the emphasis in class away from being correct or incorrect to saying, well, that works. People will understand you if you say that. Or that doesn't work. Maybe if you say it that way, people will go to a different city on the map. So it's the idea of emphasizing to your students that pronunciation, the purpose of it is making yourself understood. It's not about sounding like some native speaker or some imagined person. It's not changing your accent. It's being more effectively understood. Okay, so that's the first example activity. Back to you, Taylor.
Right. So now I'm going to show you some things that are particularly challenging for us here in Brazil. So, for instance, these 2 words here, Mark has just presented this example of a very nice activity for you to work with minimal pairs. There you can also edit and add the sounds that you want to work with. And then here we have ship and sheep. Now, I want to hear from you in the comments. Which one do you think is more problematic to our Brazilian students here? The first one, number 1, ship, or number 2, sheep? Let me know in the comments. Number 1, ship, ship, ship. Number 2, ship. 2, so we have, most people are saying the first, ship. Yeah. Number 2, sheep. So, yeah. Most people are saying it's the first one. And Raquel is one of the people, Raquel Martins is one of the people who's right. Actually, the second, at the end of the day, tends to be more of a challenge for us here, because in Brazilian Portuguese, even though we have an E that is very similar to the sound of sheep, we don't have this notion of long vowel sounds. And this is a very important distinction. Remember the Lingua Franca that I mentioned a few slides ago. Vowel length, so the duration of vowels was very important. So for intelligibility purposes in an international scenario, it's okay if perhaps my student cannot pronounce ship as ship and say something like sheep. But here the duration is very important. And here we have an interesting spelling combination, an interesting spelling pattern that actually can help us when we teach this word sheep to our students, because they see the 2 E's there. So you might want to associate that with a longer sound, like telling your students, okay, so imagine here you have 2 E's, like sheep, sheep. And I think it's an interesting way for you to take advantage of the spelling to help with pronunciation. I'm going to show you some more examples. And here I got two pairs. So here we have the word coffee, taxi, cough, and tax. What happens here is our students, when they look at the word coffee, the drink, they, for some reason, eliminate, they forget that there are these two E's here, and they tend to pronounce this as cough, cough, or cough. But how we would pronounce cough. And with taxi, the same thing happens. They ignore this vowel sound here that is actually there in terms of pronunciation. And instead of saying taxi, they will say something that will sound more like tax. And the same thing with perhaps with cough, they're going to put the E there. So if you want to work on this difference, perhaps you might want to show them some examples like this one. Now I chose my favorite singer to illustrate something that is also problematic for us. When we have these words like Madonna, it is not usually a problem for students to say this, Madonna, even though the sound, the sound that is represented by the letter M, it tends to be difficult for them in other positions. In this position, it's not a problem because we have this in Portuguese. But when it is at the end of a word or at the end of a syllable, it might be a challenge. So for instance, words like beam and bin, it might be a problem for your students to differentiate when they're listening, because if they can't see a difference in pronunciation, they're not going to be able to listen to these words and decode which one is which. And so the letter M, the sound and also the ends as well. But again, it all depends on the position. So hearing Madonna, perfectly fine. But hearing man, perhaps they're going to say something like meng, perhaps even nasalize the vowel much more and create kind of a diphthong there. Moving on to more examples here. This is the good one. The difference between the part of the body, your ear, and year, like year 2020, the year of the pandemic. Probably this is how this year is going to be known by the future generations. So why does this happen? Here in Portuguese, in English, we have these two sounds that are very similar. Ear. We have this sound here that is represented by the symbol that looks like a J, or we call it a glide. And this is just not something that would normally happen in Portuguese. So yes, Misael, I agree with you. That glide is a sound that we Brazilians hardly ever produce. So perhaps when you teach this word to your students, you might also want to contrast with the part of the body, the word ear, and then show other words in which this sound appears, like for instance, like university, So that glide is also there. Another example here with wood. Also, yes, you, that's right. Another example here with a glide. So glides at this position, they're very difficult for us here in Brazil. So our students tend to maybe say something like, they say these two vowels here, the O, U, and maybe we'll say something like wold, perhaps, but it will be very difficult for them to look at this and think of would, because again, it's not a combination that in terms of pronunciation really happens in Portuguese. Now these two, this one is a classic. The difference between deep and Jeep, the brand, the car. It is very common that students, especially here in Rio, I believe in Bahia too, in Belém, I'm pretty sure that most of the time when you have the letter D in this position, it is something like G, like we have dia, the word in Portuguese, the word dia. So this is something that they confuse a lot. And also another classic. And here we're talking about sounds that we actually have in Brazilian Portuguese. This difference between hat and a rat. We have the two sounds, the retroflex sound, this R here. We have in more specific dialects in Brazil, like in the countryside of São Paulo, some people in the south who say porta. I know that's not how people in Bahia say it. But these, even though they're sounds that exist in Brazilian Portuguese, and even though your student might not say porta, they have probably heard this pronunciation before, and they tend to confuse this a lot. Say there's like, either completely ignore it, like at, or, and then say this, the rat, like a hat, or hatchy, which is also a very common combination. Something that also, and you see, let me just go back for a second. Here, I'm basically talking about consonants, and consonant sounds, all of them are considered to be very important for intelligibility purposes. So you might want to really spend some time on these because they're important. Something else that is part of the lingua franca core is the aspiration of plosives before stressed syllables. So for the plosives, voiceless plosives, we have here the p, t, and k sounds. So in Portuguese, a person would say, for instance, or father. In Portuguese, I would say pai, which sounds very different from pai in English. So this P is really aspirated. And when I say aspirated, what does that mean? It is the extra like puff of the air that you produce when you're saying a word like pie, attack, cat. So there is much more air coming out of my mouth when I say these words than when I would say them in Portuguese, like read them like a Brazilian Portuguese speaker, like pai. So pai and pai actually just sound very different, and many people will confuse maybe pai, like we would say in Portuguese, for something like bye. I've seen this confusion happening sometimes. But remember, it is plosives in this context. So for instance, here in apple, you're not going to have aspiration, or nickel. These are not aspirated consonants because they're not in this context of happening before the stressed syllable. And Mark has an interesting activity for that, right? Specifically for this one here, the last one that I mentioned.
Yeah, about these two sounds here, the confusion of these two. It's very specific to Brazil, some parts of Brazil, this confusion. It doesn't happen, as far as I'm aware, anywhere else in the world. And that's precisely why it's problematic. a kind of idiosyncrasy that's very specific to one particular language is always going to be more problematic. Why? Because people in the other parts of the world have never heard that before, and so they're going to be it's going to be very strange if you tell them you're from here. They're going to say, where is that? I've never heard of that place. They're expecting you to say Rio. So I think this is an important one to work on in Brazil. Certainly if you're from part of Brazil where the R is turned into an H that way. So here's a rap activity for working on that.
Mark, would you like me to play it here from my computer? And,
no, it's okay. We don't need it. We'll just.
It's such a nice song, and
here it is. So yeah, this is a rap activity. I'm just going to perform it for you.
Much better.
Straight directly, because there is a recording there on the website mentioned at the bottom, and it has music and everything. So you can listen to that later, use it with your next class. But it goes something like this. If you see a rat hiding in a hat, if it's big like a rabbit, with habits like a rabbit, eyes bright red, rabbit ears on its head. Perhaps it's not a rat, but a rabbit in a hat. That's how it goes. So in the classroom, first thing I would do is play the whole thing or perform the whole thing for the students. By the way, on the website, there is also a karaoke version, which is just the backing music without the words. So I recommend that instead of using the version with me singing it, you sing it. It's always better if the teacher is the model, in my opinion. But anyway, there you go. So the first thing would be to do the whole thing and make sure that the students are noticing the letters in red there, which may be confused in certain Brazilian accents, so that rat and hat sound like the same thing. You want to make sure that they're aware of this problem. The problem is largely awareness. The students just don't think there is a difference. So you've just got to somehow make it strong in their memory so that they remember that there's something to be done here. So play the whole thing, and then you can do it line by line. You say a line, and then the students say a line, something like this. Repeat after me. I'm going to say it, and I'll point to me, and then I'll point to you, and you have to say it, all right? If you see a rat hiding in a hat, if it's big like a rabbit, with habits like a rabbit, eyes bright red, rabbit ears on its head. Perhaps it's not a rat, but a rabbit in a hat. Right, I'm sure you did beautifully. I didn't hear you, but anyway, there you go. And you can do it line by line that way. And then you can break it down into even smaller segments with little repeated loops. And this is great. I love doing this because if you hear many repetitions in a short space of time, it really focuses your attention on what you hear. Like this, for example. If you see a rat, see a rat, see a rat, see a rat, see a rat. Hiding in a hat. In a hat, in a hat, in a hat, in a hat, etc. So you can take very small bits, join together. I've got linking sounds there to show that you can join the words together. See a rat, in a hat, in a hat. So you can take little small segments and repeat them multiple times and get a kind of class rap going. And then you can do things like one half of the class do a line, and then the other half of the class repeat. So you can do a kind of call, a question and answer sort of chant in the whole class. It's great fun. Do it at the end of the lesson maybe. so that when they leave the class, if they're in a if they're present, of course, when you're teaching online, this is not so relevant, but if you're back into a classroom, when they're walking home, they've probably got it going round in their head, like, and they can't get it out of their mind. It's like they're doing homework that you never even asked them to do. It's perfect. And the idea is to have a kind of mental trace of the pronunciation. So that's what things like raps are great for, getting it stuck in the head. Okay, so that was that activity. You can find it there on the Hancock MacDonald's website. In fact, it happens to be the first one in the materials tab. There you can see it, rabbit in a hat. Okay, back to you, Taylor.
Well, do you think we have a little bit of time to talk about nuclear stress?
Woo.
Okay, so something that is also very important when it comes to intelligibility, and it is also difficult for us in Brazil, is stress in general, but I'm going to very briefly, I promise, talk specifically about nuclear stress. So for instance, this question here, can you help me? In English, usually, the last content word is what is going to be stressed. And in Brazilian Portuguese, we would say something like, "Você pode me ajudar? Você pode me ajudar?" You see, the intonation goes up right at the end. So it is just natural that our learners transfer this to English. And instead of saying, "Can you help me? Can you help me? Can you help me?" So that is going to affect how the listener perceives this message. Does this person want me to help them and not someone else? Is this person perhaps a little bit impatient? Same thing in this other example here, a very short phrase, "I saw you." And we in Portuguese would say something like, "I saw you, I saw you." And again, probably there would be some difference in the way that this message would be perceived. Like, is this person kind of like stalking me, threatening me? What is the deal here? And Mark, do we have time for that activity of the couple?
Yeah, I'll just do that quickly, yes. Yeah.
Awesome. Because now you'll see in a very fun way how you can get your students to notice these differences and practice them.
Okay. Yeah, it's as Taylor said, Brazilian students tend to put the stress always on the last word. And in English, it's usually the stress goes on the last word, but the last content word. So for example, I was listening is the normal way of pronouncing this sentence. You were cheating. I cooked yesterday. But if the last word happens to be a grammar word like me, then usually the stress goes on the one before it. And if you stress a final grammar word, then it sounds like it's some sort of special meaning. You're trying to imply something. Okay, so in this activity, all of the letter A's are just general open questions, and the response is the normal standard way of pronouncing it, with the stress on the last content word. All of the B's and the C's, however, they have some kind of contrastive stress, and the activity is for the students to guess which word should be stressed, depending on the question which comes first. So if the question is, "People always help you," the response would be, "You never help me." If, on the other hand, the question is, "I always help people," the response would be, "You never help me." So you can use this number one as an example with students. Get them help them to understand the reason why this word is underlined. The you contrasts with people in general here, and this me contrasts with those people. So it's a contrastive stress, and then make sure that the students can actually produce this, so that they can drill the pronunciation of things like this. You never help me. You never help me. You never help me. And you can use gestures like this. Use hand gestures and eyebrow gestures. And when you've done that, you can simply ask them to decide which words to underline in 2, 3, and 4. So, for example, nobody was listening to me. Which word do you think is going to be stressed in the response? I guess it would be I, because that contrasts with nobody. I was listening. And then in C, why weren't you listening? I was listening. And here we have a contrast between negative and positive. So you see how this activity works. This is a way of focusing on nuclear stress, which, as Taylor mentioned, is quite important. And this activity is also on the website I mentioned before. So we're pretty much reaching the end. I'm just going to put in the chat box the websites that I've talked about, so you've got links there. The first link, there we go. The first link is to the course that Taylor and myself run. We're having one in July as well. And the second one is the link where you find those materials I've just been talking about. The third link is where you have the article about, that I mentioned, the article about prejudice. And the fourth one is a YouTube channel where I've got a video of me demonstrating some of these activities you can look at. So we're reaching the end here, and Taylor, have you got any final points to make?
Okay, now I'm not muted anymore. No, we just wanted to say thank you. And, you know, these, of course, open for questions. Let me have my questions slide here. These days, we talk so much about a more, a fairer world and with equal opportunities for everybody. And right now we're in this moment of like Black Lives Matter and everything, which is super important. And we sometimes don't know how our decisions and the ways that we are biased influence society. And having only Americans or British, and specifically only white people in your classroom, it's certainly something that I don't really think that helps us having a more a fairer world where everyone is represented. So by having this approach of trying to include everyone and going for intelligibility, redefining error, I think we are definitely on the way to something that is more inclusive. Here are some references that we used. These are some ways for you to get in touch with us. And this last link here at the end refers to some freebies that we're going to give you this week. So go there, leave us your email. And as Mark said, we have a pronunciation course starting now in July. Mark, help me here. I'm terrible. Yeah.
July, middle of July, yeah. July 19th.
Right. So
it's the first live session.
We start in July. And we really would like to see your questions if you have any. We have a little time. Thank you so much. People are saying very nice things here in the chat. Reply the links again. So let me put some of the links again here.
I just put the ones that I gave you.
Right. Ms. Zhao has a question. There are many English accents around the world. each with its own sacrifices. Do you think it is important that the teacher knows these different accents, characteristics, and show it to the students? Well, I think it is impossible for you as a teacher to know every single accent there is, native and non-native, but we should definitely expose our students to as many accents as possible.
I think there are some big differences between all of the accents that you should be aware of. One of them, for example, is whether you pronounce the letter R after a vowel. In British English, for example, we don't pronounce the letter R in the word car. In American English, they do pronounce that. And Australian English, they don't. Brazilian English, most people do. So that's a very important difference. And I think you as a teacher, it's good if you know as many of these major differences as possible. Any more questions?
There are 3 minutes left. So I think one more question, right?
One more question.
Danilo is asking us to tell us more about the course, but you can just go to promforteachers.com, 4 is the number 4, and you'll see everything about the course. Someone else asked about Realia. And as Mark used the rubber band, that is something that usually helps a lot when you're teaching pronunciation. Any other suggestions, Mark?
Yeah, well, if you're teaching online, which a lot of us are teaching online, I find that it's nice to have the camera view rather than the slide view sometimes. And so I do things like I make these cutout letters so I can get some visual support in the camera view without using SlideShare. Also, I've got a chart here behind me. I sometimes use this, which is nice. You can stand up and use the chart online. Really are very, very important. And something even more important, maybe if you're teaching online.